Welcome to Turn 1, a Formula One podcast. Now entering the grid. Here are your hosts, Thomas and Jeremiah.
Welcome to Turn 1, a Formula One podcast. We're your hosts. I'm Thomas.
And Jeremiah.
We are excited to start episode 1 of our new podcast venture. We are two Americans that have been converted into Formula One super fans, not overnight, but almost. We are new entrants to the sport, only going back a year or so. And so we wanted an outlet to talk about all the things that we that come up and that we learn about and that we want to research and hear more about. And we thought it'd be good to have an audience of new listeners and watchers just like us to the sport that maybe don't understand all the ins and outs, as well as some veterans of the sport that hopefully we can provide some key information for. In each show, we hope to provide some stories and some opinions, but we also want to do some deep dives and actual factual information and bring things to the table that not everyone's going to be aware of if they're just a casual watcher of the sport or even a really big fan that just might not know some of the ins and outs. And then we're going to have some fun along the way as well. Jeremiah, what do we got on today's show?
So for episode 1, we're going to start it off with just a little bit about the podcast, about us, talk about really what it is that brought us into this Formula One scene and what has kept us. After that, we're going to touch on the 2023 rookie class, and more so than just touching, we're going to do a deep dive to see really what these guys have done in their past, who they are, where they've come from, basic facts like that, just so that you can kind of get an understanding of who they are. After that, we're going to go ahead and dive into F2 talk. We're going to talk about the drivers that didn't get into the Formula One scene and why that is, why some drivers seem like they jump over other drivers even though they might have finished lower in standings, something like that. And then after that, we're going to go ahead and dive into some hot takes. We're going to give 3 hot takes each from us. Something a little fun, something a little interesting, just kind of something to rattle everybody.
We don't know each other's hot takes, and so we are interested to kind of go back and forth, maybe draft style, and see who's taken what with their 3 selections. To kick off the show, we, like Jeremiah mentioned, we want to get into why the podcast, why us, and kind of who we are. So, Jeremiah, do you want to give maybe your background into the sport and how maybe you got drug into it unknowingly?
So, like a lot of American fans, I was actually brought in by Drive to Survive. I watched it through and through. I didn't watch it when it first came out, maybe a couple seasons after. But then, of course, once I did the first episode, I was hooked and went through the whole series.
Who sent you 400 texts saying you had to watch Drive to Survive?
That would be you.
Yeah.
And you know what? I thank you for it.
I started watching it maybe just like a month before you did, and I binged the entire first 3 or 4 series, however many were out at the time. And I was like, dude, you've got to watch this. Because Jeremiah has been in NASCAR at times, and he's been in a lot of other stuff, but like Formula One was never on either of our radars, I don't think.
No.
But once you start learning the personalities and the people and the money,
oh, dude,
and the equipment and the cars, like I was hooked,
it's
and I
knew
circus. You'd be.
Well,
yeah.
So to kind of play on to that, after the Drive to Survive scene, we kind of started moving into, okay, so what did these guys really go through? And obviously, we aren't going to jump into a Formula One car. That's just not going to happen. But the closest that we can get to that is joining the karting scene. And this allowed us to kind of, get in touch with that feeling of trying to go for an overtake, trying to defend for somebody that's trying to pass you, this sense of, what the drivers are feeling, obviously not to the same extent, but we are still feeling the forces as you go into these turns faster than you're expecting.
I'll add that we started with electric karting. I don't know if that was a mistake. I think it was actually a good move because it brought us into the world of karting on a smaller scale, and then we found other things that we could appreciate. So we started with the electric karts that were inside and very small. Now the karts would go fast, you just didn't have a lot of room to get up and go full speed. But the first time we tried wide open gas karts outside on a big racetrack,
Big difference.
it was a game changer because you could actually do the whole back and forth in turns, and you could get the draft and slipstream off somebody in front of you. And lap times really started to matter. Once the lap times went from like 20 seconds to like a track that was a minute long, that was a big difference in terms of racing experience. And we've done the electric cars a few times since. I don't know if I'll do those again.
I'm not gonna lie, I'll go back, but that's just because it's this quick little. Let me see how many people I can pass real quick. It's not really. I'm gonna try and push myself and try and set the fastest lap kind of thing.
Yeah. I'll agree that Drive to Survive was a big influence on both of us. It's what brought us into the sport. I think that's what a lot of the situation is for most of the American audience to the sport. F1 is not an American thing, and that is weird for us to not have our own sport. Like America never really adopted soccer. It's bigger than it was. It's still not very big. We have football, we have baseball, we have, basketball, but not really anything else that's considered European. But when you start, like I said, learning about the personalities and the people and the money, and you have all the behind the scenes access, that really opens up your eye to the whole sport and what brought us into it.
Oh man, and the drama is crazy. Whether it be you have the head of the team who's like people like Gunther Steiner who are literally
he loves Gunther Steiner.
You're going to hear me reference him a lot. But you have people like Gunther Steiner who are literally making fun of not necessarily making fun of their drivers, but undermining them, putting them down, whatever you want to call it. It's just.
I don't know, Gene. I don't know.
Or for example, to watch Christian Horner and Toto Wolff go back and forth over and over
just
and
playing
over
mind games
again
with each other.
Oh man, it's so sweet.
And we have our own kind of fan biases, which we'll get into at some point during the podcast. But I think we can all agree Toto Wolff is like the coolest human being walking the earth right now.
And Christian Horner.
but Toto Wolff, no matter if you love or hate Mercedes, that guy is the ultimate businessman, the ultimate racing officer. He co-owns Mercedes Racing.
Yeah, it's hard to beat that. I'll give you that.
He has some incredible resume points. But again, that all ties back to kind of why we wanted to do the podcast, which was we're new to the sport. A lot of people that are watching Drive to Survive are new to the sport. A lot of Americans are new to the sport. And this isn't a podcast catered at the American audience, but it is part of the show catered at people that are new like us. And we're going to take the time and do the research and get our facts straight and present information that I think people would appreciate, expediting the process into a new sport. It is hard to enter a new sport. You don't understand what you're watching. The races are quick. They're only an hour and a half. It's not like you have a lot of time to gather information. And after lap 5, the race is pretty much spread out and you kind of know what the race is going to be unless there's a safety car.
Oh, but that sweet turn 1.
Let's not ask Joe Guan Yu about Silverstone turn 1.
Oh man, that was so bad.
It was really bad. But yeah, so those that don't have the time to do the research and all that, maybe this is something they can listen to in their free time or while they're driving, and they can get info about the sport that they wouldn't get elsewhere. We've talked about kind of our karting. After watching Drive to Survive, we got into karting. Well, then we started watching the races in real time. Was it season 4 of Drive to Survive?
It was the end of season 4.
The end of season 4 was when we kind of binged everything.
It was this 2022 season that we started watching live. You started it off a lot earlier than I did, and finally I decided to pull the trigger. I bought F1 TV, a little overkill because it was halfway through the season, but oh man, it's cool. The fact that you can do the onboards. He
calls me up one race day and he's like, "Dude, you got to get F1 TV. I'm watching Max Verstappen's garage."
And you get some cool tidbits in there. You get stuff that the engineers are communicating with the drivers that you just wouldn't see regularly, or that might not get the focus whenever you're watching the broadcast.
Yeah, it's the F1 TV is definitely worth it. Definitely cool. But I started with race 1 of the 2022 season, and watched all of them live. And then you came in like on race 4 or 5. It wasn't
I want
very.
to say the first one that I watched was Monaco.
Okay. I don't know where that was.
I want to say that's like four races,
Okay.
5 races in.
So yeah, we were on that very early, and this was the first season that we watched live. We watched every single race live. Anything that we didn't, we had recorded and went back and watched it later. And then we'd always talk, playing Xbox or something afterwards while we're playing F1 21.
Which brings us into our next point, F1 21.
Oh no.
This is where we kind of started to learn the tracks. Is what that at least that's what happened for me. Is I started to go around tracks like Monaco, and when you're pushing the replay button 1,500 times because you keep
You got a
crashing
flashback
endlessly. Yeah, the flashbacks are relentless, man. But then you do something like Monza, where it's just nothing but speed driven, and you're doing nothing but hunting down these other drivers, and that feeling. I mean, it's obviously not the real thing, but man, it's exciting.
It was cool, and I think I got you into F1 the game before Drive to Survive. I think so.
I think getting me into the game is what brought me into Drive to Survive.
I remember telling you while we're sitting there on headsets with Xbox and everything, I was like, dude, you've got to watch this because the guy that you're driving as just did this on Drive to Survive, and like this crazy dramatic story played out. And it was weird because like I never got into NASCAR or anything like that. You've had your ins and outs with NASCAR.
I'll go into that later.
But any type of driving game, whatever it is, none of them actually work like F1. And we know there's actual better race sims out there. We haven't gotten quite that far. We're still on the F1 games. But in terms of driving dynamics and how the car works, we're not used to downforce packages.
No.
And so I think the first time I went around a lap on the track, and I'm sure it was the same for you, you're like, why doesn't this car turn? Well, it's because you have to slow down. You can't be going 200 miles an hour around a turn. It's a video game, but it's still as realistic, I think, as they could get it. And so once you start learning about how the cars are made and how they're all different and they're not just stock cars like NASCAR, that was like, this is a whole new world of like not only racing and the drama, but engineering, which is
oh
just
my
cool.
God. And the budgets, man, that stuff is crazy. Like obviously now there's a budget cap, and we're going to see how that unfolds here in this next year, because we already had kind of the intro to it in this past season, and obviously the Red Bull scandals and everything else. But I think that this next year we're actually going to see the main differences, as teams have had multiple years of not having that large sum of money where they can do all the testing and stuff like that. I think it's going to really bring the teams closer and not let a team like Mercedes or Red Bull really run away with the spending of hundreds of millions of dollars, just letting them do all this different kind of wind tunnel testing, all these different parts testing, just anything and everything to give them an advantage.
Yeah, I agree. And so with that is a little bit about us and why we're going to do this podcast. And I think we'll hopefully give a lot more about that as we continue doing these shows. We'll give more of our backgrounds, and we'll start just thinking of things that we don't think of right off the top every single time. Most of our conversations happen, I think, over Xbox Live while we're just racing or playing in Madden or F1 or something like that. And we'll just have these conversations, and we're like, we need to record this, if nothing else, just for ourselves to go back. But again, we thought that we could provide some helpful information to those that are new to the sport.
Right. And once again, just to reiterate, we are not media savvy. We haven't done anything like this before. This is completely out of our wheelhouse, honestly. It's just something that really we wanted to start recording just for us, just so that we can have backlogs of our conversations about the sport. And hopefully y'all can get some pieces out of that, and we can kind of spread that around with y'all.
All right. You ready to get into our first real topic of the Turn 1 podcast?
Let's talk about the 2023 rookie class. Thomas, you want to start this one off?
All right. So on the grid, we plan on doing an episode before the season starts detailing the entire 2023 grid. Every driver we're going to do a profile for. We're going to have deep dive information on, hopefully more than just ages and stuff like that. We want to get some actual history and racing stuff like that. But for today, we thought because we are rookies into both the F1 world and the podcast world, we talk rookies. So first on the list is Mr. Nyck Vries. And a lot of this stuff, again, we are new. We hope we get the pronunciations right. All we have to go off is what we've heard on TV in interviews and things like that. So if there's ever anything that we say that is wrong or needs some context, please reach out to us and let us know. Nyck is currently 27 years old. He will be 28 when the 2023 season kicks off, and Jeremiah knows how I feel about that. He is another Dutch, just like Mr. Verstappen is, out of the Netherlands. And fun fact, ready for this? 5'6". He's the second shortest driver on the grid.
Oh, man.
Second only to who?
Yuki Tsunoda.
And what team are both Mr. Vries and Yuki Tsunoda going to be
AlphaTauri is going to have a very short team.
They have by far the shortest from driving grid.
Hey, that's speed, baby.
Yeah, they're just, everybody else takes weights out of their cars and they got to add some weights to their car. But yeah, so he's got the age thing, which we'll get into here as we get into this. But Jeremiah, you want to give some of his driving experience?
Dude, his karting career was tremendous. This man took first in a lot of different karting series. Obviously, those stretch down to, the individual little European Cups here and there, and there's nothing really that's governing all of them together or really totaling all the points together or anything like that. It's kind of just if you're there, you race. But this man, he really tore it up in the karting scene. And then whenever he finally takes a step into Formula 4 and all of that other stuff that he's done, he's amazing. He got first in the European Cup, or Formula Renault 2.0. Formula Renault 2.0 Alps in 2014, he also got first in. Formula 2 in 2019, when he finally got there, he was getting first. And then whenever he was waiting for his F1 seat as a reserve driver, he was doing Formula E, and he got first again in 2021.
Yeah, I've got the same list. Like 2012, 2016, he was kind of puttering around in some lower end GPs and like the Formula Renaults, like you said. But like you said, whenever he got into the, like, especially Formula 2, do you know his standings in the years that he was in each Formula event?
Ooh, I don't.
Okay, so 2017 to 2019, Formula 2, ready?
Right.
He gets 7th in his first year competing in Formula 2. That's pretty good. Now, obviously, we know there's the prodigies that have like immediately come out swinging and get top 3 and like we're talking season totals, not race standings, but he gets 7th. Year 2, he goes to 4th. So already this guy's on people's radars either for a driving academy seat or some kind of test or reserve driver because he's showing improvement in the equipment that he's got. And then year 3, Formula 2, he wins the whole thing.
Yeah, and to kind of tack on to that little gets better and better every year thing, he's also competed in the 24 Hours of Le Mans for 4 years. And I'm going to tell you, those first 2 years, he got 15th twice. But that third year, he comes in 7th, and then the next year finishes in 4th. Slowly climbing that ladder.
See, that is an event that I still don't fully understand. So they drive for 24 hours?
Yeah, there's multiple drivers for a team, and they sit there and they go around a track for 24 hours.
They get gas and everything.
I don't know, man. We're definitely going to have to do some deep dives on
that. I know
that.
Toto Wolff's done those, right?
Yeah, I want to say so. I know that Toto Wolff and Christian Horner both have prior driving experience. I haven't looked 100% into that. Maybe that's something we can cover in a further episode down the road, but
maybe Gunther's done it.
Ooh.
No, but so he goes 7-4-1 in his Formula 2 career. Then he makes the jump to Formula E. Now, Formula E, I think, is new to the whole world, so that might be something we have some even footing on with some other people. Is it's new. I don't know how it's ranked in the world of Formula 1 and its feeder leagues. Is it the same as Formula 2? Is it higher than Formula 2? Is it lower?
From what I've gathered, and don't come for me on this. All right, I'm just saying what I've gathered. But I kind of seen that really if you're going to go into Formula 1, your steps are, Formula 4, Formula 3, and then Formula 2. And then when it comes to Formula E, it appears to me that it's filled with drivers that didn't quite make Formula 1 and old Formula 1 drivers that want to stay in the Formula game.
And they're using that Formula E is like, it's not experimental, but they are still changing the rules drastically every year. So it's almost like an experimental league where like either you're getting the new up and comers that are trying to get a seat, or like you mentioned, the old guys that they know a thing or two, right? And so they figure it out. So he moves into there. You got his standings for Formula E, or you want me to throw those at you?
I mean, I just have the first place finish, but go ahead.
Yeah, so this is the only place where his career is a little bit weird because he goes 11 in year one, Formula E. That's 2019 season. His second season, he gets first. So obviously, big jump up there. He's shown that he can do it. But then his third year, he regresses to ninth. And at that point, he was in the Mercedes test driver seat. So I don't know if that maybe took his mind off of the Formula E. I don't know. But he was in the academy starting in 2020. He had a really good 2020 season and then immediately fell off in 21.
You know, granted, though, his teammate was Van Dorn. And, you know, he might not have made it like a big name and, you know, gone on to Formula One and done great things and all this. But, man, he's got quite the repertoire himself. I mean, yeah. I mean, I've heard some great things about him. I watched a couple videos on him just to try and familiarize myself with him, and it all pointed towards him going into Formula One and being something. So, I mean, he's not going against nobody.
You're talking about Van Dorn?
Yes.
Okay, I know nothing about him, so we'll need to do some looking. But you hear these names, and okay, in all honesty, we see a lot of these names, or we know a lot of these names before we started doing research for the podcast because we play the F1 game, and these are drivers in the game, and so you see the names like Ticktum and Schwartzman and all that.
Yeah, and Daruvala.
But now these names actually have meaning to us because we're trying to figure out who these rookies are and why they're getting picked and all that, and so we'll add Van Dorn to that list. So Nyck de Vries gets put in the Mercedes test driver role in December of 2020. He finishes up his stint in Formula E in 2021. And then he gets his first race in that beautiful Williams seat.
And boom, he's on the board. And boom, he finishes higher than Latifi in the standings.
I tied.
Oh, did they tie?
Because like 3 races later, I think Latifi took a 9th.
Yeah. We're not going to count that.
Our main beef with Latifi is that after that race, he gave de Vries almost no credit. He said something along the lines of, this is what the car is capable of, this is what we expect.
Yeah, and so why aren't you doing that?
Why aren't you doing it every single race?
Why is Albon getting an 11th regularly, and you're down fighting with the Haas's for survival? Not even the Haas's, because the Haas's were finishing higher than him.
Oh my goodness. Hey everyone, Thomas here, co-host of the Turn 1 podcast. Just wanted to hop in here real quick and say thank you so much for watching or listening to our first ever episode. We are beyond excited to continue this journey with you. Just in the editing of the first show, we found so many different ways to improve not only the quality of the production, but also the quality of the content. So we're hopeful that you stick around for many more episodes to come. If you're currently listening to this episode, awesome, thank you. You can also find us on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok at Turn 1 Podcast. We will be posting full-length episodes, highlights, and clips on those 3 channels. You can also find us on Twitter at TRN1 Podcast, as well as Facebook, Turn 1. Finally, we have an email set up for everyone, trn1podcast@gmail.com. Please feel free to send us any comments, suggestions, or questions you might have. Just like the podcast, we are looking to grow and learn and become even bigger fans of the sport of Formula One. Thank you again for listening to episode 1. With that, we'll get back to it. So wrapping up Nyck de Vries, the guy's got as solid as there can be in terms of a karting career. He's got all of his time with the GPs and the Formula Renault events, whether getting podiums or winning, works his way up into Formula 2 where he wins the thing, works his way into Formula E where he wins the thing, gets the test driver seat at Mercedes, but somehow he ends up with an AlphaTauri seat.
Dude, honestly, he could have gone anywhere. Like, did you know in a practice session he filled in for Sebastian Vettel at Aston Martin?
No.
Yeah, man. So he was a Mercedes reserve driver who filled in for Williams, who did a practice session for Aston Martin and ended up on AlphaTauri.
Do you know why he got that many opportunities?
I don't.
Because he's going to be 28 years old.
Hey, man.
And this is my one look. Okay, Nyck de Vries is awesome. I'm so happy that he got points when he used the Williams seat. I'm happy that he either beat or tied his teammate Latifi. Okay, but here's what I don't get. Well, this is a topic for another day, but just to throw it out there. AlphaTauri is Red Bull's like junior team, right? Or the B team,
sure.
The developmental team.
Sure. Why
in the world are we putting a guy that is 28 years old on the development team?
I mean, it's a fair topic. It really is. And, we can definitely
He's good. Like, don't get me wrong, but that should be where your 18, 19, 20, and 21-year-olds are.
I get it, but he had to sit behind, people like Nikita Mazepin, who brings in a massive amount of money with him. He's obviously going to get the seat. People like Latifi, same scenario. And, those two over De Vries, come on, man. He should have been in a long time ago. And that's just how it is. But the fact that he's not, here we are, AlphaTauri first year. Let's see what he's got.
I'm glad he has a seat. Don't get me wrong. I just don't know why it's AlphaTauri, but that is for the people at Red Bull to decide. All right, let's move on into Oscar Piastri.
Dude, this guy was crazy. Now, granted, he kind of had a little bit of a lackluster karting career. He never really got those solid first place finishes over and over and over again in all these standings. But you still have to be good to get to the next step, regardless.
And I think he had the unique thing where he's out of Australia, which, not that it's removed from Formula One, but it's much more removed than the European countries. And so I think maybe more eyes were on him because he was running all those Australian circuits and stuff. And if you even do well in those, you're getting scouted a little bit better.
I'll tell you what, though, man, whenever he starts making his way into the Formula Series, he got after it. He really did. And I'll tell you what, he stayed on the Formula path the whole time. He didn't go to any kind of other series. He didn't do any kind of Le Mans races. He didn't do any kind of GPs. It was all Formula. He did Formula 4, Formula 3, Formula 2, and now Formula 1.
So we'll get into a little bit of bio stuff. Do you know what he did before his karting career?
No.
He did RC car racing.
Oh, the Lewis Hamilton entrance.
Yeah, but not like going out in the street with your friends. No. Like national and worldwide RC car competitions that I didn't even know was a thing. And he was out there tearing up. Apparently he ranked really high. It is impossible to find any standings on those, but that's what he had. He does have a couple things going for him. We mentioned he's out of Australia, obviously, like the left behind Daniel Ricciardo.
Oh, come on.
He's the new Ricciardo, but he was born in 2001, which seems crazy to say, and he is 21 years old. So he's got 7 years on his rookie counterpart, Nyck de Vries. But yeah, walk us through his Formula racing stats.
So I'm going to start in 2019 just because of the fact that the years prior, it was kind of him feeling it out and trying to really get things going and figure out how the car is going to work, how things are different whenever you get into the single seaters and everything else. This dude, starting in 2019, was in Formula Renault, racing for a team called RACE GP. And that could be race. I could be pronouncing that wrong. I'm not 100% sure. Like I said, I'm learning. But first place, boom. Next year, moves up to F3. He's racing for Prima now. Boom, first place. Moves to Formula 2, still at Prima. This is now 2021. Boom, first place. And so naturally, if you're going to do back-to-back-to-back 3 different series, coming in first, your rookie year for all 3 of them, he deserves the seat, man. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. The controversy that went around him on Twitter and all of this little stuff that happened.
We'll get into that controversy. I've got points. I will say, to your topic on him getting into the Formula Series, I put on my talk sheet 2018-2019, the start of domination.
Yeah, man. 3 years of just sheer dominance.
This was a fact I pulled off of somewhere. He is only the 5th driver ever to win F3 and then F2. And then he's the first driver ever to have 3 consecutive championships in a row between feeder series. So with the feeder series being F2, F3, and then obviously F4, which has changed names a number of times, just like F3 has. So he tore it up. He earned that seat at a very young age, and I think he's primed to do pretty good at McLaren. There was an interesting tidbit that I found from Christian Horner. Christian Horner, obviously team principal and a managing partner at Red Bull Racing, said that they missed out on an opportunity to sign him right before he started doing Formula Renault Euro Cup.
Wow, they were scouting it that young.
Not to put him on the F1 team, but to put him in the Red Bull
academy.
Junior Academy. Wow. Just like Carlos Sainz and Max Verstappen and so many other drivers have been through that dominant program. He could have been in that. Turns out he didn't need it.
No.
But there is a chance he could be sitting next to Max Verstappen right now if all that worked out.
Oh, man, that would be crazy.
The 2 young gunslingers out on the track.
Yeah. I mean, he's going to be something special, man. Watching him in this upcoming season, I'm excited. I mean, honestly, I really am.
So we touched on obviously him winning F3, F2, and moving into F1, but he has a little bit of a gap in his resume, which some people look down on, but I think his gap is warranted. He served as the test driver and reserve driver for Alpine, which everyone now in the F1 world is aware of between 20 and 2022. So we won't go off on a huge long tangent about this, but I want to talk Alpine dispute.
I will say this. He was a reserve driver for Alpine, but he was also a test driver for McLaren.
I did not know that.
I didn't either. I was doing some deep dives
I didn't know
on
you
him.
could do that.
Yeah, I feel like that's a conflicting interest, but that's fine.
Yeah, I guess you can have two different contracts. So when did it come out that Ricciardo wasn't getting his seat filled? Like halfway through the season? We can get actual weeks on this, but it was around the halfway point, right?
I want to say it was on the summer break.
Okay, on the summer break, we hear that Ricciardo is not returning to McLaren, and everyone's like, "Oh, well, it's obviously going to be Oscar Piastri that fills that seat." But then you start hearing the rumblings of he's under contract for Alpine and he's in their program, and how's this all going to work? And me and you were talking for like days, waiting on F1 Twitter to break the news that someone had been signed as a McLaren driver. And then who sends out the tweet? Alpine, saying, congrats to Oscar Piastri for being our new driver on the grid in 2023.
Ugh, not a good look, man.
And that's when we started doing all the research on like how driver announcements were made. And the one common theme, who will always post when a driver makes a move?
I mean, I would assume the team.
The team and
who?
the driver.
Oh, yeah. Obviously.
Every single time a driver's made a move, they have made a public statement or comment or had a press conference, or in today's world, made a Twitter post or Instagram post saying, I'm loving my new team, happy, and they have like the whole like animated graphic of them wearing the new team stuff. Piastri, silent that entire day. Not only that whole day, but literally for weeks after that. His Twitter just went from posting daily to nothing.
Yeah, you could tell he was really in some kind of mental battle on how he wanted to handle this.
We just knew there were like lawsuits going on behind the scenes or something.
Something tells me he forgot to let somebody know he was going to be doing something next year.
So after everything's settled, we find out that they go to some version of the FIA court, which we know nothing about, didn't know that was a thing, but there's some kind of internal court legal proceedings for contract disputes. And the court ruled in favor of Piastri and McLaren, saying that he was not obligated to be an Alpine number one driver. Essentially, he could have his pick of teams.
Yeah, and that alone, man, you got to understand putting Alpine in the hot seat.
It looks so bad.
As they now try to fill a spot that they had reserved for somebody who went back to back to back.
I almost wonder if they knew he was out the door and that was their last ditch effort to try and keep him. But the only thing I don't like about that is now you've got a guy racing for you that doesn't want to race for you.
Right. It's not a good look.
And how does the money situation work? Like clearly that's a different contract going from a reserve driver to a number one seat.
Oh, he gets paid. I promise you, regardless, Alpine pays that man.
Well, yeah, but like if they hadn't negotiated it, how do you have a contract?
Yeah, clearly, like I said,
you can't just announce someone's your number one driver. I guarantee you McLaren reached out to him with some numbers before they announced it. Oh, my goodness. But anyways, he's racing for McLaren in place of Daniel Ricciardo. He will be on the grid with the possibly overpaid Lando Norris. That is another discussion for another time.
Yeah, we'll see how he takes that McLaren seat, because we know Daniel Ricciardo really struggled with it. And to go from a team where he was mainly dominant and then to go to another team after that where the cars still handled kind of similar, we still saw what he was able to do. He got podiums, he got results. So then to go to McLaren with a car that clearly handles completely different and just not be able to recover for 2 years. I mean, we got to see what Oscar's going to do.
I think we need to add that to our list of deep dives. Something that Jeremiah brought me into in terms of the cars. Obviously, we know that the cars aren't stock cars. They're all different. They're custom made to the team. But I did not know that the cars are not built based on the driver's preferences. I will go off. I would go out on a limb and say if you have a long-term driver that you've signed for a long period of time, you might be willing to make the car to some of their preferences. But ultimately, they're just trying to make the best car, right? That the engineers feel.
So this was an actual interesting thing for me to do a deep dive on, and I'm not going to get heavily into it because we have other topics that we want to cover. But they make the car and they just make it as fast as it'll get in the simulation testing, and then whatever they come up with, that's what the drivers have to kind of alter their driving style to match.
So a guy like Piastri, who would be in the sport, I think, regardless, but the reason he's in a McLaren seat is because Daniel Ricciardo could not hack how to work that car.
Right, and another tough part of that is that the team makes changes to the car throughout the whole season. Yeah. That's why you'll see something like Sergio Perez, who was giving Max a run for his money in the beginning of the season, and then nearing the end, he was like 6 positions back? He would be in 6th place while Max is leading. That's outrageous.
Yeah, it's huge differences. We'll do deep dives on how the cars work, the upgrade packages, how the drivers handle the car and all that. But I found it interesting that, again, a guy gets his chance in the sport because another guy who was dominant one time, for sure, suddenly can't figure out a new team's car. And they don't really adjust the car to try to help him.
No,
they just take him out of the seat and put somebody else in it.
Listen, there are 20 positions on a grid. And there are more than 20 drivers. So if he's just not making the cut, he's not making the cut. And, you got to feel for Daniel because, God, we love the guy. But
yeah, the best personality on the show.
But if you're not getting the results in a sport where there's only 20 spots, you got to make some moves.
You got to. All right. You ready to round out our 2023 rookie class?
Yeah, let's go ahead and dive into a young Logarn Sargeant. 22 years old out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And we officially have an American on the grid for the first time since Alexander Rossi.
Man, okay. I will preface this part of our rookie discussion with, I know almost nothing about Logarn Sargeant except for he is American. And that excites me mainly because I think it'll get more Americans into the sport. I don't care if he wins or loses. It'll be cool if he's awesome, but it's ultimately just another gateway into the sport that I'm glad that is happening. But Jeremiah's got all his facts and figures.
Yeah, for starters, how about the fact that, yes, the last American was Alexander Rossi, but he didn't have a full-time seat. He was just kind of like a fill-in guy, and that was 2015.
Oh.
Yeah.
So our knowledge of F1 outside of just watching YouTube videos also started when Drive to Survive started in 2017.
Yeah, we had to do major deep dives for ourselves.
So anybody before 2017, 2018 is gray area.
Can you tell me when the last American to have a full-time seat was?
Oh, it's going to be older than I think it is. Early 2000s.
2006.
Okay, mid 2000s. I'm close.
By a gentleman by the name of Scott Speed. Now, there's a name for you.
Okay, that's a NASCAR name.
Oh, 100%.
Scotty Speed around the outside wall.
Yeah. But yeah, 2006 was the last time that we had a full-time seat from an American on the grid.
Jeez. Where's he from, in America?
Who, Logarn Sargeant?
Yeah.
Fort Lauderdale.
Oh,
He's from Florida. He spent time there. He did a couple racing series down there, but this was all karting, because he was young at the time. And then finally he makes the jump to European karting.
So not only do we have an American on the grid for the first time in however long, he's going to have a home race in Miami.
Dude, he's going to have a home race, but if you're talking about in terms of how these other drivers get home races, he technically has three home races.
He's the new Verstappen, with Verstappen having Belgium and the Netherlands and Austria.
This dude had a very successful karting career. I mean, he came in first on 12 different occasions, different leagues, different programs altogether. He came in first 12 times.
Goodness.
That's absolutely ridiculous. On top of that, once he finally started getting into the Formula Series, he just kept going. I mean, well, here, let me round out his karting career, and let me tell you that he actually came in first in the FIA Karting Championship, which is something that, people like Charles Leclerc has won, and we're talking about dominant people.
Yeah.
So that excites me.
Okay, help me with this. He gets 4th last year in F2.
I can cover that.
Why is he a guy for a seat right now?
One, he brings the American paycheck. He brings
Okay.
the American pocket, the American fans. That's the biggest one.
So he's a pay driver, but unlike Stroll and
In a
Latifi, it's not
sense.
his family's money.
Kind of.
The audience.
He also earned it. You know, Latifi,
Yeah.
he didn't do so hot, man. Nikita Mazepin, you know, he didn't do so hot.
Any Latifi fans are not going to like this podcast.
Yeah, and we apologize for that, but hey, that's how the dice rolls. He came in second after finishing on the podium in every race that he finished in Formula 4 UAE Championship.
So every single time they do the whole dance and all that stuff, he is on the podium.
Dude, any race that he finished, he won, or he got a podium. Is absolutely ridiculous.
We can't even pull that off in karting when there's only like 4 of us.
Actually, he had some run-ins with Piastri, too, because, you know, Piastri's 21, Logarn Sargeant's 22. So check this out. He finished third in the F4 British Championship, competing with Piastri. Granted, Piastri finished ahead of him. I get that. But
Sure.
they've been right there with each other for years.
That's one of those things that's really cool about the sport, too. So you don't hear about this a lot with, like, obviously football's the biggest sport for us, but you don't hear about guys competing with each other on like the Pee Wee or Pop Warner leagues, right? Like it's super rare to have one guy that can be like, you might have that in a game every weekend where they're like 2 friends are competing with each other. In F1, these guys start at the age of 4 or 5 karting, and they all know everyone in the sport.
Yeah, it's crazy. Logarn Sargeant started at 7, and some might consider that a late start, but when you're thinking about
7,
yeah, 7 years old is considered a late start. That's ridiculous. But when you have people like Max who are starting at 4 or 3 or whatever he was,
has a seat by the time he's 17.
His dad was a former F1 driver. Like, it's hard to compete with that. He just had exposure from a way earlier age.
So the fact that he's American and the fact that he's just been a dominant racer, maybe not in F2 entirely, but literally every other walk of his life, the guy is a dominant racer.
See, you say that, but we'll get into that as well.
I mean, 4. Okay, I said 4. Like, that's still pretty good.
Right, but we'll hang on.
I know, I'm jumping ahead.
So yeah, he moves from Formula he moves from Formula 4 to Formula 3, where he finishes third behind Pourchaire and Piastri. Ooh. Once again, back and forth for years, and they've been right there with each other.
Yeah, so they're now the new Max and Charles and
it's just the upcoming
George
class.
Russell.
So by the time that these guys start to get in their, you know, I guess you could call it primes, where they're starting to figure out the car and they're starting to make the mental decisions to take corners sharper, or, you know, do what they need to do to cut those precious tenths and hundredths of seconds. I feel like, you know, Max will be the next Lewis in that sense, where he'll be the older guy who's still dominant, still doing his thing, but, you know, obviously doesn't have the whole rest of his life ahead of him in terms of his racing career.
Right.
And then you have the up-and-coming class like Piastri, Sargeant, and all of them who are just now getting in.
And I think there's 2 different approaches to that. I don't know. So in terms of racing style, obviously we've seen De Vries do one race. It was relatively conservative because he pretty much started or finished where he started, but he held his spot. He wasn't like aggressive trying to make a ton of overtakes. He just let the race come to him. But I don't know anything about Piastri or Sargent's racing style. I'm interested to see if they are the methodical like Mercedes approach like Hamilton and Russell both have, where it's finesse, right? It's the small things. Or if they're the Max Verstappen, I am going full speed around this track, and if you're in my way, that's going to cause problems.
Yeah, the Max Verstappen effect, where it's like, I'm taking this turn, and if you're there, you won't be.
Yeah, he's on the edge for the entire race, which if he gets it, you win. If you don't get it, you're out of the race.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to see how the 3 guys shape up.
Well, to finish off his Formula 3 era, I just wanted to add, he also raced for Prima with Piastri. They were on the same team.
Teammates.
So again, neck and neck going at it.
Okay, and that doesn't... Okay, so we've got Piastri going to McLaren, Sargeant going to Williams. They shouldn't be close to each other.
No.
But with the falling of Ricciardo and the McLaren found themselves down towards the midfield.
Dude, weren't they behind Alpine?
Yeah, they did.
So they're no longer the 4th team.
So they're not the worst team, but Williams has also seen a rise. So I think you're going to see Piastri and Sargeant at some race at some time next to each other.
Dude, and then we have to talk about the fact that Williams is going to go off. I mean, they have Alexander Albon who's getting 11th, 10th, maybe not 9th, but he's getting like 12th, 13th, right up there at the top of the middle of the pack, not necessarily at the bottom in your 20th or 19th spots. And then this young up-and-comer Logan Sargeant, it's going to be interesting to see how those two pair.
I think with Albon, we'll cover this in our driver profiles before the season kicks off, but not to say that he didn't get a fair shake at Red Bull. It just wasn't his time to be on a dominant team, I don't think. And so he kind of had to...
I don't want to get into it.
But like he wasn't going to produce what Sergio produced, but he's still a good driver.
We're not going to talk about how he would have gotten podiums if Lewis Hamilton didn't wreck him out twice.
No, I'm not saying that.
About...
I'm saying he's still an up-and-coming driver, but it just wasn't his time at Red Bull.
Yeah,
but it is his time at Williams.
But hey, he is killing it at Williams. And if that doesn't knock on the door of some of these top teams, I mean, I don't know what will. He's taking that Williams and regularly putting it at the top of the middle of the field.
Will we see a Piastri and Albon lineup in the future?
Interesting.
Okay.
So to finish up on the whole Logan Sargeant bit, he moves from Formula 3 to Formula 2, and yes, his rookie year he gets 4th place. But let's talk about that.
Okay.
In his last 11 races, he retired 5 of them.
Oh, that's like your first season on F1 the game.
Oh,
except it was like 13 times.
We got better. We got better as we went. We're not here to talk about that. This isn't the F121 podcast. This is... But... Yes, so he gets 4th, but he was in 3rd with a decent amount of points. I mean, it looked like he was going to finish in 3rd. Now, granted, you have these mishaps at the end of the season that's going to counterbalance that and obviously push him down to 4th. But if we're looking at the evidence of his actual on-track racing, it's promising, man. It really is.
He finished 1 point behind Lawson.
Exactly.
In 3rd. So, again, if you take those 5 DNFs, give him points in any of those, he's now a podium finisher.
Literally just one race, give him 1 point where he didn't DNF.
Yeah, and he's now a top 3 F2 driver.
Exactly.
I get it. Okay, that's fair enough. Let's just hope he doesn't wreck out his F1 car. They're a little more expensive than the F2 ones. Oh my goodness. All right. So that wraps up our 2023 rookie class. We have Piastri going to McLaren, De Vries going to AlphaTauri, and the American Logan Sargeant entering the grid with Williams Racing. We want to do one more, maybe not deep dive topic for episode 1, but we want to bring up a question that we are both lost on, and it ties to the Logan Sargeant discussion. It ties to Piastri and De Vries. Anybody that's coming up in the feeder series of F1. Why do the top F2 drivers not always get the seats? And I'll give you some examples, and I want you to kind of bounce some things around here. 2022, you have Drugovich, who's 22 years old. You have Pourchaire, who's 19 years old. You have Lawson, who I just mentioned, at 20 years old, finishing in the top 3. None of them are getting seats in 2023. Schwartzman, who had a high finish in 2021, he's a reserve driver, still no seat. What's the deal?
You know, I've given this some thought. I mean, yeah, we have the money thing, so we're going to have who's going to be easier to market, right? Yeah. So we have the American Logan Sargeant, who's going to be marketed all across the United States, bringing in that group of people, those eyes, onto that team. And then you have people like Pourchaire who have, been dominant in their prior years, so... I mean, Drugovich won the whole thing, didn't he?
He won the whole
thing.
He
won the whole thing, and he's not
no
in
one's.
A seat.
I don't think he's a reserve driver or a test driver. I could be completely wrong, but I don't get it, and that is just our question to kind of the audience: is why don't all these F2 drivers that are dominant for years? And I'll bring up some other examples. So you have I mentioned Schwartzman already. But also Ticktum is on that list of a guy that had he had a couple of good years in F2, and he's out of Formula racing at this point.
Yeah, he took off and went and did his own thing. And, respect to that. He saw that he wasn't going to get the seat that he wanted to get. He saw that it was going to be a while. He saw the young guns coming up. And, maybe he just wanted to jump ship.
The only thing I can think, I'm going to relate this back to football because this is what we know, right? Okay, think of the NFL. obviously you have your players that are dominant in college. Most of them are on NFL rosters. But then you see those guys on teams that you've never heard of before, and you look up and they played at, Idaho State or Eastern Michigan University or whatever, and they made no noise in college. But the NFL scouts knew they were there. Maybe they didn't have a team around them, but maybe they had all the tools and developmental aspects of their game that the NFL scout said, I can put this on an NFL roster and do it. So I'm thinking with F2, they're seeing that in Vries, obviously, he gets the seat and gets the points, but Piastri and Sargeant being a little bit younger, they just know they have what it takes.
I think that kind of ties into the practice sessions because you remember they made it a thing now. They have to test rookie drivers. So I'm thinking when they're putting these poor chairs out there, when they're putting these Drugoviches out there, when they're putting these Drugoviches out there, these Lawsons, they're kind of looking at them. I mean, we saw Schwartzman out there. He was definitely out there getting some time at, I believe, Alfa Romeo or Ferrari. It was one of the other. But my point is that they're getting looks at these guys. I mean, it's kind of like if you want to compare it back to football, it's like the NFL combine, right?
Right.
So these guys are being put to the test. Now they're put on hards or they're put on experimental tires, whatever it was. So they're not going to be putting out the fastest laps, but you can compare that to what your drivers that are currently doing do when they're on the hard tires, and you can kind of make inferences based on what you're seeing. Also, how they attack the track. Are they cutting the corners tight? Are they coming in? Are they exiting the corners with plenty of speed, leaving themselves with plenty of acceleration to get to the next point without losing too much time? I mean, these are traits, these are skills that are learned in these lower leagues, and I think that they're getting the chance to see these in the practice sessions, and maybe that's kind of what, I mean, to tie back to why these guys don't get seats, I think that's one of the main reasons is they get a look at them and they might not like what they see just yet.
So they can look at them when they're driving for F2 and say maybe that car doesn't fit his style, or the Logarn Sargeant argument, if he had 5 DNFs, okay, if he gets points in any of those, we know the guy's solid. Maybe he gets top 2 finish in the league. Right?
But I don't even think it has anything to do with the car necessarily, but it's where is his skill levels at? Because yes, the car is completely different, but they're not making these cars like we talked about earlier for the drivers.
Right.
They're making them for speed. So it's about how well are these young guns adapting in these short practice sessions to these cars.
Sure. They can get 20 to 30 miles an hour more.
Yeah.
On, they're already racing the F1 tracks, but now you're doing that track with second shaved off of your total time.
Oh, yeah, dude. And the G-forces that are produced by these F1 cars are completely different from the F2 cars.
I want to experience that once in my life.
Hey, they make 2-seater F1 cars that you can go and ride with somebody.
I want to go from driving my truck
hopping
straight into an F1 car.
And you know what? Who knows? Maybe if we get some audience eyes, maybe if we get some connections, we can arrange something like that. Because I'm going to tell you right now, I would pay big money to see you driving an F1 car around a track.
I wouldn't, but maybe one day I would pay. But this would be a good time for us to talk about some places that y'all can reach out to us and give us some information and feedback. Because again, we're going to present obviously the information that we have, which we're going to try to research it and give as much factual information as possible. But then we're going to have some questions like this, which this is open-ended still. We still don't know why F2 drivers that are finishing 1, 2, or 3 do not always get seats. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they go into a reserve driver seat. Sometimes they make it out of that reserve driver seat like Piastri did, and sometimes they just vanish from the sport. And so we have several different social platforms you can reach out to us on. Facebook, we're at Turn 1. Twitter, Turn 1 Podcast. That's TRN1 Podcast. Instagram at the Turn 1 Podcast, all spelled out. Same with YouTube and TikTok. And then finally, you can just shoot us an email, trn1podcast@gmail.com.
And guys, we want you to reach out because it's like we said, we don't know what we're talking about.
we know some things.
Obviously, we do our research. We do our due diligence. We're not just jumping in front of a camera and talking. But the fact of the matter is that we're both new to this sport, and you have people that have been watching this sport and studying this sport for years. I mean, as long as we've been watching football here in America, they watch F1. I mean, it's as simple as that. These people have ties to Ferrari like we do to the Patriots or the Dallas Cowboys or something like that.
Yeah. No, I agree. If you just search us on any of their social platforms, you'll find us, or again, email us at trn1podcast@gmail.com. Okay. Last segment of the day. Fun.
Here we go.
So we have a sheet where we track all of our ideas online, and we put ideas down for the show. And I had an idea for 3 hot takes from the 2022 season. and I didn't want us to know what the other put. So I texted him. I said, "Hey, I'm putting hot takes on my list. Don't look at my sheet."
And then he went and changed the text color from black to white so that it would disappear in the background just so that I didn't see it.
So he goes and looks at my page, and he finally figures out that it's white text. But I don't think either of us have seen either of the hot takes.
It's not fun that way.
So let's go ahead and get into this.
So to start off these hot takes, we're going to go ahead and go down the list. We'll do one each, and then we'll move to the next one.
Okay.
So why don't you start us off?
I did not really rank mine from 1 to 3. Did you? I kind of just put
I
them
didn't
on there.
rank it. No, I just put them on there.
Okay. I'll just start with my 1 and go down to 3.
No, start with 1. I'll do 1 next.
Okay.
I like this idea.
Ferrari would have won the whole thing if they had even average strategy.
Whew. You know what? If it was the beginning of the season, I could see it, but man, nearing the end of that season, it didn't matter what strategy they ran. The Red Bulls were just quicker, and the tire degradation for Ferrari was ridiculous.
I don't know if they didn't give up, but I think they maybe switched their goal for the season from winning the whole thing to maybe figuring out the car or the driver or something like that. Because they're Charles won the first 3 races, right?
It was something like that. It was
first 2 or 3
ridiculous.
And he would have won several more along the way just in the first half if it weren't for bad strategy or the car exploding.
Dude, there was a race this season where Carlos Sainz left the garage onto the track with a mix between mediums and hards, or mediums and soft. It was one of the other, but still.
So what was it? The obviously there's a lot of different strategical mistakes that they made. That is another one of the deep dives that we're going to do is individual seasons per teams that had specific call outs. So we're not going to do like the entire 2021 or 2022 Alfa Romeo season, but we might talk about Ferrari strategy in a season, right? Because it was poor. So they had that race where every other team went out on hards and immediately said, "This is bad. No, we're not doing this." They all returned to the garage and put back on like the softs or mediums. And then Ferrari, the 10th team, said, "Let's send them out on hards." After it literally didn't work they were the last one to make the change.
Yeah.
And then it was either Charles or Carlos that goes there and said, "It feels like I'm skating on ice."
Yeah, meanwhile, Max is on mediums burning it up.
Tearing it up. They lost so much time doing that. They had the issue that sent Charles into the wall.
Oh, dude, what about the one in Brazil where Magnussen got obviously his first pole position? And you know what? Credit to him because that was all strategy, but it was sweet to watch as an American fan. But
it didn't last long.
Everybody was on slicks, and here comes Charles Leclerc on intermediate tires.
Yep.
And he did a lap on them, didn't pit, went around again because why not?
Yeah, and then I mean, again, so many examples, but the last one. So we had the hard tires after everybody said it was like ice, and then they had the deal where they pit Charles to try to get the fastest lap. And not only did he not get the fastest lap, he lost points because he moved down in the standings in the race.
That's bad.
And he even came on the radio during the race and said, "I don't want to do this." And they said, box.
Dude, do you remember at the end of the race, he didn't even know that he didn't get that finish. He was told in the
by
interview.
The interviewer.
Oh, that was crazy.
And you could just tell he just, not that he knew that was coming, but like it didn't surprise him that that's what happened. All right, hit me with it.
Okay. Carlos Sainz would have finished higher than Charles Leclerc.
If what?
If he had the car at the end of the season, or at the beginning of the season, because Carlos was destroying Charles at the end of the season. He really was. I mean, he was tearing it up.
I don't disagree.
Now, whether or not he would actually have beaten Charles Leclerc, that's up for debate, and that's the point of these hot takes. But I really think he looked solid in that back half.
Because he won a race, right, last year?
Yeah.
Won a race. He had that car explode on him in the middle of the race.
Oh, that was scary.
He dealt with the same strategical errors Charles did, but you're right. His game at the end of the year picked up tremendously.
Dude, at the end of the year, he wouldn't let Ferrari mess up the strategy.
No.
He would make a call. They would say, "Hey, we're going to do this," and he would go, "No." Straight up, no. And you know what? He finished higher in Charles in those races because of that.
Yeah. I don't know if it would be to the extreme of him beating Charles, but I think it would have been way, way closer. And he could have stolen points from Charles, so to your point, he might have beaten him just by stealing points. Man. All right. You're not going to like this one.
Right on.
I mentioned earlier that we each, not to say that we have biases, we're fans of the sport just like anything else, but I think we look at the teams, because we're so new to this, pretty evenly, or with the same, the same lens.
Yeah.
But I have this thing with Mercedes that they kind of annoy me, and I think it's because they were dominant for so long. Lewis is the best driver, maybe not of all time, but one of the best of all time. And I think officially Lewis Hamilton has been passed by George Russell, and I don't think Lewis will finish. I'm going to take this to one level and then go one step higher. I don't think Lewis will finish in the top 5 ever again in the driver standings. I don't think Lewis will finish in the top 5 of a race ever again.
Jesus. All right, so let's unpack this a little bit. So George Russell did finish higher than Lewis Hamilton, but let's look at things. They had a completely different car than the one that Lewis was used to for the past 6-7 years, ever since the V6 era happened.
Yep.
And so they get this new car. This new car isn't producing, the W13, and it's awful. And, George Russell, he's trying to make a name for himself. He's got that dog in him right now. He's trying to make a name for himself. He's trying to get the seat. He's trying to get the number 1 spot. Let's be honest.
Yeah. We thought at the beginning of the year Mercedes was going to be like the 5th or 6th team on the grid until they figured it out like a third of the way through the year. It was a rough start.
It was a rough start. But you know what? I feel like they started to figure it out at the end of the season.
But let me clarify. And I say Lewis has been passed by George. Part of that is skill. I think Lewis still obviously has like the wisdom and the mental capability to make really awesome moves on the track. But Mercedes is now shifting how they operate their team to George Russell, because he's the new face of Mercedes racing, or will be when Lewis steps away. And so, like you mentioned, the car, Lewis had a very similar car for a long time, and then they start changing it. Well, why would they start changing it? It's because they got George Russell.
See, I'm going to have to disagree. They started changing it because it was terrible. It was an RC car that was racing against F1 cars. It's not comparable.
You can let Piastri drive it then.
But let's be clear. There was a race where Lewis Hamilton finished higher than George Russell, and Toto Wolff smirked. It was caught on camera. The man smirked. So for you to say that they're shifting to Russell, I don't believe. I think, and for multiple reasons, I think they want Hamilton to get his 8th. And the reason why is because it'll take Mercedes to whole new levels of marketing, whole new levels of legacy. I mean, you could start talking to them on terms of maybe not necessarily on par with Ferrari, but I mean, if you're looking back at McLaren's success and what they are now, but you're looking at where Mercedes was when they started, when Schumacher was with them, versus where they are now, I mean, there is just realms of difference.
But what if they go from Hamilton 7 to a quick Verstappen 2, and then they get George Russell with 7?
And that's possible. And you know what? I feel like if in these next couple of seasons Russell is regularly still beating Hamilton, then the change will happen. It's just inevitable because they want to be on top. But I think for right now, the eye's on Hamilton.
That's still my hot take. Again, George has passed Lewis officially. I don't think Lewis will finish in the top 5 at the end of the driver standings. And then again, just to ramp it up, I don't think he'll finish in the top 5 of a race. And I could have limited that to podium, and I didn't. I went top 5.
Yeah, you did. You took it all the way, and that's fine.
So he's not even getting close to a podium, which if he does, I'll be happy for him, but I don't see that happening. All right, what's your number 2?
So for my number 2, I actually put a hot take that I have for going into 2023 based on information from 2022.
Okay.
I've got Logarn Sargeant finishing in the points 5 times.
Ooh, okay. Let me ask you this. Do you know the 5 races?
Well, let's see. Miami, Vegas.
Just all the U.S. ones. Coda.
No. I don't know what track it's going to be, but I can feel it, man. Because what I was seeing from Alex Albon this past year and Williams and the way that they progressed throughout the season. Now that, you can't look at Latifi. That was a joke. Let's be honest. I'm sorry. He made it to F1. He did his thing. But let's be clear. He is not an F1 driver.
No.
And so I feel like from what I saw from Alex Albon getting into the points on several occasions, and with Logarn Sargeant being this young hot gun from America who's going to have all the support in the world behind him, I just really feel like he's going to get at least 5 points finishes this year.
So we need to look into their driving styles, because I'll agree with you. I think that's definitely doable. I wonder if he is a more aggressive driver. I think that will suit him better at Williams with that car. That car's fast. There's no getting around it.
No,
it's a well-made car.
Its straight line speed is ridiculous.
It's got all the Mercedes parts on it, so it's a good quality car.
To an extent.
But I wonder if him just going full on, not reckless, but like full on, he doesn't care what happens to him and he can put it full speed ahead. Like if he can finish in the points, even if that means in a couple races he either wrecks out or has a low end finish.
Sure.
I think 5 points finishes is realistic.
Well, dang, I should have shot for the moon.
That would have been. I mean, it seems excessive because he could not finish in the points at all.
Right.
Like there's that aspect.
There's always that possibility
Because he's a new guy.
But he could be close. He could be coming in like 13th, 12th, 11th, whatever. But that's still not a points finish.
Yeah, but the fact that just last year again we saw Williams finally take a little bit of a step up, and you have obviously Albon doing well. If Latifi was able to get points, and Vries was able to get points, then anybody can get points. Maybe Logarn Sargeant can.
Do you believe in miracles?
Oh, no.
I like to think I do. All right, let's hear number 3.
Oh, man. Okay. I teased this one earlier.
Okay.
And this has been something, I'll say that I've had this viewpoint for a long time, but it's really not. It's mainly been this year where there was a lack of production here. McLaren committed way too much to Lando way too early. Now, I'll add some caveats to that. One, he's like the third highest paid driver on the grid, which is crazy for a team that is finishing middle of the pack with a guy that has next to nothing in terms of results.
Sure.
Here's what I think McLaren saw in Lando. A driver they could market, and he is in everything. Every video from McLaren, every video game ad, every advertisement you see on TV or Instagram or Facebook, it is McLaren and it is Lando Norris. So I think they're getting bang for their buck in terms of just using him as a marketing personality. But in terms of a racer, he's nowhere near a top 3 racer, yet he is paid like one before he ever got any results. And I think that's going to shoot him in the foot because McLaren's just going to be saying, where's our results?
God, see, that's tough because where would you rank Carlos Sainz?
He's a top 5 driver.
Okay, so Lando, maybe not top 3, but you got to remember, whenever they were on the same team in McLaren, they were duking it out.
He's not top 5 either.
All right. I mean, I'm not going to disagree with you. I'm not going to disagree with you.
He's maybe barely top 10.
Nah, I'm going to put him at like 7.
Okay,
maybe
but
6.
The results just
I hear you. But you also got to take into consideration Daniel Ricciardo's driving ability and what he got out of that McLaren versus the moldable and very obviously adaptable Lando Norris.
And you have a team like McLaren, and again, our F1 knowledge is when Drive to Survive started, and then anything we've researched prior to that, McLaren is a big brand. Huge. Not only in just auto in general, but in terms of the world of racing, they are huge. And the fact that they can't put a team on the together on the grid that can compete with Mercedes or Red Bull is wild.
Dude, this is something that I've been wondering for the longest.
It's McLaren.
How can you have a company who, just like Ferrari and Red Bull, can pump hundreds of millions of dollars and do pump hundreds of millions of dollars with nothing to show for it? I'm talking about like...
You're getting beat by a Renault team in Alpine.
Right. No, exactly. You're getting beat by a team that, one, can't produce the same amount of money as you can. Granted, Renault is a big company in Europe, and I understand that. But McLaren is everywhere. And McLaren is associated with luxury, with speed, with racing. And I don't see that from the McLaren team.
They committed all their resources to Lando. And I guess now they're bringing in Piastri, which is good. But we'll see what happens with Lando. I think that might shoot him in the foot if they're paying him so much and he's not producing.
I get that. I can see that.
All right. What do you got?
All right. This one you are not going to like.
Oh, no.
And it's because of what you've already said. Once again, a hot take for this upcoming 2023 season based on what I saw at the end of 2022.
Okay.
Hamilton wins number 8.
No.
Dude, hear me out.
This isn't even an argument or discussion. Just no.
Hear me out. They have been working on this car tirelessly throughout the entire season. You know this offseason they're going to be working on that car. You know it. And right now, as I stated earlier, the focus is still on Hamilton. So with the focus being on Hamilton, with him still having the skills that he have, with with Mercedes making changes to their car to make it better because the W13 was not good. And with how they finished at the end of the year, let's not forget they went 1-2.
They improved.
In the final race, they went 1-2.
Okay. Let me throw something at you. Verstappen wins in 2021, right?
Sure.
Why didn't they do that for 2022?
They were. You know what? They brought a different car, and it was not good.
So they're probably going to bring a car that's not good again, and then improve it as the season
dude.
goes. But Hamilton's already out. By
It's
that
like
point.
I said, with them finishing as high as they were finishing in the races at the end of the season, I just feel like they're going to bring a way bigger package, and it's going to be Hamilton focused.
So Hamilton is, in your eyes, Hamilton beats Verstappen for his third. He beats Charles for his first. He beats his teammate George, who's already shown he can win a race.
Yeah, dude. And I'm
man.
gonna tell you why, man. Because these are the kind of stories that happen in F1. You look at past history of F1, there's always some kind of wild story to the year. I mean, back in the day when Hamilton was young and he was going against Vettel and Fernando Alonso, they had like 4 people who possibly could have taken first. And, you know, those stories, they write themselves. They really do. So I can definitely see, you know, Hamilton dominance, and then the young buck, the rival, the one that comes in and takes it all away from him. 2 back-to-back championships. And then Hamilton, diversity like he hasn't seen in years since Nico Rosberg in 2016.
In equal machinery.
I just feel like these are the kind of stories that make F1.
Okay, so overall, I think I made it clear I disagree, but I'll give maybe some pros to your argument. Okay, so we've talked on here a little bit with the rookie class about age being a factor, De Vries being 27, 28 when the season starts. Okay, the drivers obviously age out of the sport at some point, but I think Hamilton is a guy that has some serious longevity to him. You also look like a guy like Fernando Alonso.
In his 40s.
Okay, so hang on. So Fernando Alonso obviously wins late aughts championships, right? He was the dominant driver of that day. And then he kind of has a lull, and he moves around some teams a little bit. I think he's in like a second prime.
Dude, his drive is ridiculous.
He's a top 6 driver right now.
Dude, I completely agree.
And the dude is a menace on the track.
He took a year off, and then he was like, all right, I'm coming for it all.
And he's great again. And so maybe Hamilton kind of has that where he's
It's
pure
diversity.
dominant.
It pushes people.
Yeah, pure dominance, and then a lull while he figures out the sport and as it's changed. And then once he figures it out, it's right back to dominance. So maybe. Dude, I don't see it, but you do.
It's a matter of drive. So, you know, you have to understand Lewis Hamilton hasn't had anything combating him for like this entire V6 era, except for his own teammates and Valtteri Bottas and Nico Rosberg and all of that. And now here he is with somebody who's been challenging him for the championship year after year and is dogging it out for that first spot. Now you have to remember Lewis Hamilton's only 38 years old. Yes, 38 is a lot, but Fernando Alonso's 41.
Yeah, and still really
And he's
good.
got this second prime. You're telling me Lewis Hamilton, who is better than Fernando. Why do I say that? Because 7-2, let's be honest. He won 2 at Renault and versus Hamilton, who won 1 at McLaren and then 6 with Mercedes. I mean, you can't really argue with that.
Yeah. I think it was mind-blowing, too, this season whenever we figured out Lewis Hamilton was older than Sebastian Vettel.
Yeah, that was wild.
That was a game changer I don't know if we were ready for because it feels like Sebastian Vettel's like a really seasoned veteran of the sport that like it was his time to leave and he's leaving on his own terms. And then you look at Lewis Hamilton, who's like 2 years older than him.
Yeah, he's like, Sebastian Vettel's made out to be this wise wizard who's seen it all.
Like 36 years old.
He's been to the championship grounds. He's been on the top. He's been around the F1 grid. He's seen it all. And then you look at Lewis Hamilton and realize, oh, wait a minute. He's been there longer.
Oh, my goodness. All right, that is all we have for episode 1 of the Turn 1 of Formula One podcast.
We hope you guys enjoyed it, and hopefully you're going to want to tune in for our next couple episodes as we try and figure out what really this podcast is going to be like and where we want to take it.
Absolutely. We ask for all your comments or suggestions. We will post them with the podcast, as well as you can just email us at trn1podcast@gmail.com. For now, that's all. Thanks, guys.
Bye, guys.